Hello, everyone from snow-covered New York City, and welcome to this episode of Live with Mighty Hive. This episode is titled Turning Complex Analytics into Action. How market mix modeling delivers effective media strategies. Thank you so much for joining us here today. My name is Adam Remsen. I am the Director of Content Marketing at Mighty Hive. I am very happy to welcome our two panelists today. First, from rainy Manchester, we have Steve Hodgson. He is the Marketing Insights Manager at the Co-op. And for those of you in our American audience or who perhaps don't know, the Co-op is a grocery store chain with over 4,000 locations. If you've ever been in the UK, you probably tripped over one. Also, we have here today Ruben van de Venter. He is the director at BrightBlue, which is a sister company of Mighty Hive. They are joining us today for a discussion about media mix modeling, or marketing mix modeling. See, that's the thing. Before we even start, we have to address that some people call it market mix modeling, some people call it media mix modeling, some people even call it econometrics. Let's not get too caught up in that. Everything you see, it will say market mix modeling on our slides, but a lot of people use these terms interchangeably. Maybe I'll ask the panelists which one they subscribe to sometime during this webinar. So with that said, I just want to do a little plug for Mighty Hive. This won't take long. We are a new breed of media consultancy. Mighty Hive is a global leader in advanced marketing and advertising technologies. Mighty Hive provides consulting and services for media operations and training, data strategy, and analytics. You can see a few of our esteemed clients on the right. These are just the ones that we can talk about. And if you want to learn more about Mighty Hive, come to mightyhive.com or contact us at questions@mightyhive.com. So a little bit of housekeeping here. The complete recording and slides will be available later. We will also be doing a live Q&A at the end. Use your Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions. You can submit them at any time during the webinar, so don't feel like you have to wait till the end. Anytime anything pops into your head, just hit the button and send us something. We will try to get to all of these questions at the end of the webinar. Before we get started, I think it's always good to get a feel for why everybody came to join us in this webinar today. Maybe you just want to learn more about MMM. Maybe you are preparing your company for some market mix modeling. Maybe you want to learn more about what a grocery chain like the Co-op is doing. Either way, just choose the answer that best describes your reasons for joining us, and we will take a look at the answers a little bit later. So let's start with the basics. I think it's always good to just have a definition, lay it out there just so everybody knows what we're talking about, and perhaps some people are new to this field. Market mix modeling, in essence, it uses historical data to help marketers choose marketing channels that affect sales. So let me just repeat that. It uses historical data to help marketers choose the best marketing channels. So when we say historical data, what do we mean? That's data that happened in the past. It's things that you can look to see what happened last year at this time. It can come from internal sources like point of sales systems. It can come from previous ad campaigns and the reports and data that are generated from that. It can also come from external data, such as weather patterns and seasonality, things like that. And you take all this data and you run it through a statistical model, and it helps you predict the marketing channels that will yield the most sales. And when it's done right, marketers know which marketing channels are driving sales. They know when to deploy certain channels. They know how to blend the marketing channels for optimal results. And they know when to dial back their spending in order to avoid diminishing returns. What do they get out of it? First, real ROI. This is the cause and effect relationship between advertising and sales. And Ruin told me that on average, his customers see about a 30% lift in ROI. And he can talk more about that later. Now, second is less waste, how to optimize. This is for marketers to know how much and when to turn the marketing dials up and down. Third, better sales forecasting. Marketers can feel more confident in their forecasting numbers, and they have the data to back it up. There is a process. There's always a process. First, we collect. A lot of companies don't even know how much data they have. You gather it all together, and then you clean it. The taxonomy is very important here. You have to have all the data sets speaking the same language. Then you build your models, and you base this on your marketing objectives, and I'll let our panel get into that. But they can be specific or very broad. And once you put these models to work, that's when the human element starts to come in. You analyze the reports, and finally then you optimize your media spending for the best results. So now that we have the basic framework, let's take a look at the poll and see why you all joined us here today. All right, so most people are here to learn about MMM, market medium, market mix modeling. And yeah, that's most of it. And some people want to learn more about co-op. So that's great, because that's very much what we have planned. It sounds like some people are well along their way in this data journey. So rather than just at the very beginning of it. So I think that's great. I want to now reintroduce my guests today. Everything that I described in the last few slides makes it look sort of simple. It's anything but. It's complex. And it's as much art as it is science as well. So these guys that we have here today, we're very lucky to have them, are going to get deeper into this, the process and the benefits of it. Let me introduce Steve Hodgson first. He's the marketing insights manager at Co-op. Over his 12 years, he's worked on campaign development research, creative effectiveness, and media optimization across numerous categories, including food, which of course is his current role at the Co-op. And Ruin van Deventer is director of BrightBlue, and as I said, it's a sister company of Mighty Hives. They specialize in MMM. He has 16 years experience with marketing analytics across a wide variety of categories. That's 28 years of experience, guys. That's a lot. So starting with Steve, I want maybe if you could, I mean, we took a look at sort of the your broad credentials, but if you could just tell us a little more about what your day is like. What is the day in the life of Steve in terms of just what your job entails?
Yeah, absolutely. So, if you'll pardon the cliche, it's quite varied. There's no 2 days the same really. So at Co-op, we have a food retail business that you mentioned earlier. We also have a funeral care business. We have an insurance business. We have an online prescription delivery service. We also have a legal services business. So I'm working supporting marketing colleagues across all of those businesses. So a lot of my time is spent on econometrics or market mix modeling, as we're talking about today, and that could be across any of those businesses really, primarily food, funeral care, and insurance. I could be supporting colleagues on how they can help optimize their creative, but also my role is across the whole breadth of the marketing mix. So it could be helping to evaluate a completely different initiative, like for instance at Co-op, we have stores at some of the major music festivals in the UK. So that's something that I've spent quite a bit of time on, and super interesting. So yeah, really varied. It's all about how can we understand what we're doing and how can we make it better, and to deliver more, both in terms of the brand and financial metrics that we're wanting to shift with our marketing efforts.
Sounds complex. And someone who knows about complex is also Ruin. Ruin is coming to you from South Africa. We have all the climates represented actually here today. We have hot summer, snowy winter, and then this kind of rainy in between as well. So Ruin, tell us what it's like for your day on the job.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Adam. Basically, I am in charge of running, obviously, these econometric projects or market mix modeling projects at BrightBlue. I look after quite a few clients, some e-commerce clients. Steve, of course, I look after food, funeral care, and general insurance with them. But also some other financial clients, gosh, and everything in between, really. And really my role is to make sure that our models are delivering on their objectives in terms of what the clients are hoping to learn from them, make sure they are statistically robust, and sort of make sense, and that the outputs are super actionable, I would say. So really clear as to do A, B, C, D, E. This is what we expected to do. This is why we expected to do that. And really, this is the change we're hoping to make to the bottom line through implementing these recommendations. So that would be my job at a top line level across all my clients.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, both of you. I'm going to stop sharing the screen because we're getting into the Q&A section. And I want to start with Ruin. You could give us some background on the history of MMM, how it came to be what it is today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think since the sort of beginning of advertising, really, people have been interested in sort of what the outcome was of the campaign they ran. And there's that famous quote by some very famous person whose name I can't remember, that said sort of 50% of my marketing works really well and the other 50% is wasted. It's just I have no idea which one. I'm paraphrasing, I think, but there you go.
John Wanamaker, he was a department store owner, and that was his quote. Yes.
Well, there you go. And so there's always been, as I say, this need to understand what your marketing is doing and how it's working. And there's been various ways of looking at this. At the most sort of fundamental level, you sort of do tracking, and you basically look at what you spend and what you get for it. So, you might spend $100,000, you might get 100 eyeballs or 100,000 eyeballs seeing that, and that's through channel A. And then you might have to spend 500,000 in a different channel to get those same 100 eyeballs to see your ad. And in some channels it's really cheap as well. So you can imagine digital, it's actually quite cheap to get those impressions versus something like, I don't know, out of home or whatever the case might be. But that's really simplistic and useful to a certain extent, because you can sort of start figuring out, well, if the cost per impression on channel A is twice the cost per impression on channel B, then clearly the implication is channel A is going to be twice as effective at driving responses than channel B. And so when those sort of ratios get out of whack a little bit on certain channels, already you can start making decisions as to whether you think that spending on a certain channel is worth it or not. But that's all based on a cost per sort of basis, which isn't really insightful insofar as you only know how much things cost. So that sort of moved on, and people started doing clever things like saying, well, phone this number and quote, Saturday 7 for 10% off or whatever the thing is. And so that's sort of direct tracking, right? So people phone special numbers, or the number you put on the little brochure, or that you put on the out of home, on the poster outside, or on the TV ad or the radio ad or whatever.
QR code, whatever it is, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's or you use a specific URL these days is something people try as well. Now the problem is that you'll find probably online like 80-90% of people don't do that. They Google your name and then go to your website. So great. 90% of people aren't going to use that thing online. And then secondly, offline, unless you literally do telesales, not that interesting, because what happens to someone who sees that ad and then walks up to your store? Again, you're just losing, okay, fine, you're going to start getting an idea of what works and what doesn't. And maybe what this can give you is some sort of idea, as in within newspapers, which newspaper drives the most direct response. Might only be the tip of the iceberg, but at least you can start looking at, oh, well, this one where we pay a bit more for, we do get better responses versus the one we pay a bit less for. That's sort of moved on since the introduction of cookies a few decades ago. I don't know, a few years ago, people have applied that sort of methodology or that thinking to the online space, and so you get to multi-touch attribution, whereby people start looking, well, what was the last thing you looked at before you came to our website? Or, some sort of rules-based thing. Well, let's say the first interaction and the last interaction is important, and let's give them a bit more weighting, and and figure out that way what's important. Now that's great, but the problem there is it only looks at the online space, right? And so any interaction or any action or any sale that happens online has to be given back to another online source, because that's the only way you can actually do it. You have no visibility of whether that person saw a TV ad or radio ad or whatever the case is. And so two issues there. Firstly, as I say, it ignores 90% of your, or let's say 50% of your media spend, potentially, even more. But also it sort of forces the attribution back into 100% of your sales came from something online. Whereas maybe only 20% of your sales actually came from online, and the other things were driven by other actions you've got no visibility of. And so through the years, people sort of started looking at, well, actually, hang on, when I do a promotion, I see my volumes and my sales volumes go up, right? Or when it's Christmas, I see a spike in my sales. And so what people realized is actually using correlation analysis, i.e. seeing whether you're seeing consistent uplifts in volumes versus consistent actions you take. We can actually correlate those and start figuring out, well, hang on, every time I'm on air on TV, I see a certain uplift in my data, right? And the problem there is why you can't just see it as a sort of, plot it up and look at the data, is because there's a million other things going on at the same time. And so what econometrics does is it looks at the correlation between your outcome, your KPI, your sales variable, and the inputs. So all your media, seasonality, the economy, what your competitors are doing, time of year, temperature, everything. And it correlates those things up at the same time. So we obviously can't do that as humans, because the minute you go beyond 3 dimensions, it's all lost. But luckily, mathematically, you can go into as many dimensions as you like, and you can get those correlations up, and you can get those sort of cause and effect impacts, as you said earlier, Adam. And so the power of econometrics really, and where it's come to, is the power to really decompose every week of your sales into the constituent parts and understand exactly what the incremental bits were from each of the activities you did. And even beyond that, looking at things like, how does TV actually impact PPC or search? How, is there synergy between your TV and your door drop media? Are we seeing better responses from door drops when you are on air? All that sort of stuff you can get to the bottom of. And so, yeah, it's a really powerful technique, and it's got its, pluses versus some of the other ways of looking at your marketing effectiveness. But that's it in a nutshell, I think.
That's great. That's a great overview. And so let's look at it from Steve's point of view. Maybe you can give some background on the co-op's use of MMM over the years. I mean, grocery store chains have done a lot of very traditional type advertising, but this is, on the cutting edge in essence. And so maybe you can just kind of walk us through how the co-op has been using it over the years and how it has evolved.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I've been at the co-op for a long time, and certainly we've been doing econometric modeling for pretty much as long as I can remember, really. Certainly going back 10 years or more. And my first involvement was really on the food side, helping with data collection. That was probably 10 years or more ago now. And then, over the course of a few years, we used a number of different partners for econometrics. And it was quite ad hoc, it was quite sporadic at times. And also the deployment of it was quite fragmented. The results weren't always trusted within the business. So about 6 years ago, I moved into a new role. And that was a role that basically pulled together all of the insights to support marketing, primarily in the food business to begin with. Later, that role has grown to include the other parts of the co-op, but at that time it was just the food business. So one of the first things that I did sort of 6 years ago when I came into that role was I wanted to appoint a new partner for econometric modelling at co-op, and the main reason for wanting to do that was we wanted to have a much more regular and much more structured approach to modelling. And we also wanted a consistent approach across the different parts of the business. So it was food and funeral care at that time, and I was working with my counterpart in the funeral care business. Anyway, went through this process, and ultimately we ended up appointing BrightBlue. And from a food perspective, I suppose my priorities really were firstly to build up the trust in econometric modelling as a discipline, and trust in the recommendations coming out of the other end. That was kind of really the main objective. We really wanted to get initially a really solid understanding of our channel performance and start to make some optimizations really. But I think at the very beginning, we had quite simple requirements really. It was all about just understanding at a channel level and being able to optimize at a fairly macro level. Now that's evolved significantly over time, and the way that I'd sort of describe that, I suppose, is that we have used the modeling that we've had up to a point, but that original national sales model in food, for instance, after a period of maybe a year or 18 months, it got to the point where we were asking questions of that model that it really wasn't set up to be able to answer. So, for example, we wanted to get really into the specifics of our digital media. But unfortunately, what we found was that within our deployment of digital media, digital display tended to correlate with social. So as we spent more on social, we spent more on digital display. As we spent less on social, we spent less on digital display, because those things were so sort of closely correlated. Within the national model, we weren't able to basically break out those two things apart. We also wanted to understand sub-channel optimization. So for instance, within press, for instance, which is a big channel for us, we wanted to understand, for instance, which formats are most effective, or which titles are more effective. And with that national model, we just weren't able to do it. So the next step in our evolution really was to model at a much more granular level. We went from modeling at a national level to a store level. And that was really powerful for us, because what it meant was that we were able to, rather than just being able to optimize at the level of, TV versus outdoor versus radio versus online, for instance, we could get right into the detail of it and say, well, if we're going to recommend taking money out of, say, out of home and putting that into press, we could, rather than just saying take money from out of home and put it into press, we were saying take money from this bit of out of home and put it into this bit of press, and overall that's going to be the most effective approach. It was really, really sort of valuable for us. And we've done a similar thing in funeral care and moved from a national model to regional modelling. As well as that, what we've also done is we've broadened it out. So we've broadened out our modelling approach now to include insurance, which wasn't part of the original sort of remit, for want of a better way of putting it. So now we can model across sort of the three biggest parts of co-op in a consistent way, and we can get a really good view on how media is performing across those three parts of the business. And then the other things, sort of slightly tangential to the main modelling project, but we wanted to understand how our brand metrics were affecting sales. So we ran a separate brand modelling project. That was really interesting, because it helps us to understand which of the brand metrics we should really be paying attention to. And the final thing to sort of mention, I suppose, is category modeling. So most of the modeling that we do with BrightBlue is at a total store level. We're interested in driving total store sales, but we were asking a lot of questions around, which categories should I advertise in which channels at what times of year. And by running this category modeling project, that also enabled us to have a lot of insight into, there's some obvious stuff like, beer and soft drinks is great during the summer. Again, you don't really need an econometrician to tell you that, but there's some really interesting channel stuff and category stuff coming out of that we've been able to get a lot of value out of, really. So yeah, it's been I'd describe it as an iterative process, but over the course of 6 years, I guess a lot's changed.
That is fascinating, and it's a lot. Like, that is just imagining how much data that is, because you're talking about individual stores which service different communities, which may celebrate different holidays, which may have different traditions, that sort of a thing. You also have seasonality, which may differ from place to place, or certain region to region. Categories you were talking about as well. And down to the individual store level, this just sounds like a lot of data. And so, Ruin, I put it back to you. How are, when we're talking about processing and cleaning and modeling all that data, how do you cope with so much data across all these? Oh, there's other business units too. That's the other thing. You've got multiple different business units as well. So how do you cope with all of that across all of those business units?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things you'll often hear from an academician or any analyst, I suppose, is the more data, the better. So it's really, we love it. And the reason we do is because you get the ability to get into these more granular questions, as Steve sort of said. And the reason you get to do that is because instead of just having one observation per week for what the outcome was of whatever your mix was that you put into that week, you've suddenly got 4,000 outcomes across the country. And so that you can see that even just minute changes in some of the mixes, so for example, display versus social or whatever, even just small mixes you can start to pick up within the data if you've got lots of it. That does, however, present a challenge in that it takes a chunk of our cloud storage to keep this data going, and also some other things in terms of, well, how do you get all the data in? How do you process all the data? How do you present all of it back? How do you make sure it gets modeled? Because you could easily spend 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks just modeling. Making sure everything's perfect and that sort of stuff. And so there's a few things that go on to facilitate the step from sort of a national model to this really complex store level model. And I think there's sort of 4 key things that we talk about when it comes to this. The first one is sort of automation, and that's automation around data collecting. So we've got stuff almost down to a fine art. Things come in a very templated way, and a lot of our reporting, especially on the sales side of things, on the store level data side of things, is automated. So the guys at Co-op in business intelligence run automated reports, and we sort of have access to where these things are stored, and they get pulled automatically and checked and run. And from sort of that data being available and us pulling it, it takes us literally, I would say, like a day to come back and say, oh, hang on, we've got questions. This doesn't seem right. That seems, there's something not matching here. There's something matching there. And so that's really good, the automation in terms of the collection. But then secondarily, also the automation of the validation, as I just said. So within a few days, we're able to tell whether the data matches what we've had in the past or doesn't, and sort of address the issues there. Then in terms of validating the data, we sort of have a session, I would say maybe a week and a half after getting all our data in, where we take the entire sort of Co-op group or all the stakeholders through every bit of data we got in a very summarized way, looking back over the last 3 years so that we can spot any patterns where there's anything that doesn't quite look right, or if we see a spike somewhere, we can go back to the client and say, well, hang on, we're seeing this spike in sales in this week. Does that match with what you're expecting us to see in this? Or why on earth did we see this massive spike in broadcasting VOD impressions? And then inevitably someone will go, well, actually, it's lockdown has caused, X, Y, Z to happen in terms of online viewing, and that's why we're seeing that spike. So that's the first bit, the automation and validation. And then there's sort of clever modeling on our side as well. So we use quite advanced modeling techniques within BrightBlue to make sure that models get updated pretty quickly. We've got dedicated servers that actually run the Co-op models because they're so big. And so it's really gone from it literally taking it would have had we done this the way we've always done this, it would have taken us maybe a day or two to run one single iteration of the model. But we've come a long way since then, and at the moment, we can run these models literally in a matter of tens of minutes as opposed to days. And that's two-sided. We've got the computing power, but we've also got the techniques that go into it. And they're sort of akin to machine learning or artificial intelligence models in that they use outputs from the past, they learn on those inputs, and they iteratively sort of evolve the model into the latest version of it. And then the two other bits that really enable us to do this sort of project is engagement with the client. I mean, Steve and his team are fantastic. The team at their media agency is fabulous. They're just there for you. They help you. They get stuff to you when and as you need it. And something that we have with the co-op that's also quite useful is our long-term relationship. I mean, we've been doing this with the co-op for nigh on 5 years now. And me and Steve have been working together for, I think, almost 4 years now on these things. So it's really good because you start to develop a real understanding of the business and sort of you start to spot anomalies or questions, or start to anticipate what the questions might be well in advance of the project actually kicking off. So that's sort of the key, I think, to making sure you get all the data in and are able to service something that's this big quickly and efficiently.
So Steve Ruin showered you with praise there about how smooth everything operates. I'm sure there are challenges internally, though, that you face every day. And so maybe you could talk a little bit about what those challenges are across diverse business units in terms of how your department works with them.
Yeah, sure. I mean, there's a couple of challenges, I suppose. I mean, the first one is, it's an ongoing challenge, I suppose, which is getting to a process that that works really, and that delivers not only the modeling outputs that we need it to, but also the actions that that people will actually go ahead and put into practice, because ultimately it's all a waste of time if you can't get that action out of the other end. So this is a process that we've been working on since the beginning, and like I say, it's probably still a work in progress, but I feel like we've got it to a really good place at the moment now. What we've tried to do is to make it as collaborative as possible, and that's been a real sort of enabler for the project, in the sense that what we really want is to get as many interested parties together and contributing and having a voice in the process to help us get those actionable recommendations out at the other end. So whether that be the media agency, the guys at BrightBlue, from an internal co-op perspective, you've got my team within Insight, we've got data science, finance, obviously the marketing team are absolutely sort of fundamental to the process. So what we've done is we've built this process where before any results get communicated at a senior level, we've always had at least 2 working sessions to run through the results. And rather than those results being like a presentation, so to speak, it's much more of a conversation. So what we're doing with those sessions is we're really trying to get as much context and narrative from all of those interested parties. And the reason that we want to do that is so that we can interpret the results through a sort of a pragmatic or real world lens, rather than this sort of theoretical lens that there's a real danger that you get caught up too much in the theoretical side of it and end up with a bunch of recommendations that might be optimal from a modeling perspective, but have no real bearing to what's possible in the real world. So the big challenge is to move things beyond the theoretical, and what we're always aiming for is to come out of any modeling update with a set of actions that everyone that's been involved feels that they've got a stake in and that they can really sort of sign up to. And we found that has made a massive difference to the value that we're able to get out of the modeling work that we do. And then sort of the secondary point was, it's all well and good getting that process set up, in food as it was in the first instance, but then the challenge is how do you roll that out across the other parts of the co-op? So across funeral care and across insurance. And for me, the challenge there, having worked the the bulk of my career at Co-op in the food business is just being able to get my head around, okay, so how does a funeral care business work? How does an insurance business work? But I think, being involved in the process of deploying the econometric models in those parts of the business has actually been really, really helpful to me in terms of learning about those businesses, because there really isn't any substitute for, you do need to get into the nitty gritty of it, and it's been a great way, for me personally to learn. So, other challenging factors, I guess, are at the beginning of last year, we had a situation where for the first time ever, we were deploying econometric modeling projects across food, funeral care, and insurance simultaneously. So, and this was like the week or two before lockdown started in the UK as well. So the challenge there was really just getting your head quickly out of one business and into another. So, you'd come out of a food meeting and be straight into a funeral care meeting, and it's just how do you get your head into those different parts of the business quickly. Sorry, Adam, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I think we'd lost Ruin, I'm afraid, because I know he has a spotty internet connection in South Africa, but we'll see if he dials back in. But you're the one that really matters, Steve, anyway. So I've got a couple more questions for you before we have to try to get him back. You talked a little bit about, getting buy-in across, with the stakeholders, and, that's easier said than done. Could you dive a little bit deeper into that in terms of like, how do you get people involved? How do you get them to care, about this? Is it just results, or is there something more to it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think my reflection on it is to just try and create an environment really where everyone's pulling in the same direction. I guess ultimately everyone involved in this process has got the same goal, which is to make Co-op's marketing as effective as it possibly can be. It's definitely my aim, certainly what the media agency wants to deliver, and also the marketing teams, the finance teams, ultimately everyone's got the same objective. So it's really to try and create an environment where we all feel like part of the same team. I think that's probably, if I was to contrast how we run things now with maybe how things were at the beginning, that's probably the biggest change. It felt like maybe previously there wasn't necessarily always that same pushing in the same direction. So I think that's really been key in making it successful. I think creating an environment where people are willing to speak up is really important as well, because like I said earlier, in order to get the most out of the models, we need to get people's input, we need to get people's context, we need to move it beyond the model says X to, but in real life there's X, Y, and Z different practicalities that we need to keep in mind. And if people aren't able or willing to share that information, then it's really impossible to get to a set of recommendations that we can actually take forward into the real world and put into action. To do that, I think it's really important to try and demystify the process as much as possible. I think there's, if I had £1 for every time someone said, I'm a bit scared of coming to this meeting, I'd definitely have a few £1 anyway. Let's put it that way. It's, I think there's this genuine nervousness about econometrics. It's seen as maybe a bit of a dark art, or, maybe a bit black box. So the way we tackle that is to run training sessions, education sessions for people, and just to try and make it as accessible as we can do, so that people aren't intimidated by it. It's really helpful to have a senior person that's willing to champion the work, and we're very lucky that we've got a few of those at Co-op, so that's obviously very important. And also just making sure. So go on.
It's been long enough that you don't have an old guard there that's like, let's just do it the old way with the old circulars and like that. I mean, it's been years that you guys have been doing this, so I assume that that's not an issue for you guys, right? It's really more. It seems more you're at the stage where more and more departments are getting involved with this. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. And I'd say it's less about being obsessed with what's worked in the past. And I think probably the bigger watch out is not to be too swayed by the latest new sort of shiny thing that comes along. And I think there is a there is a real danger that you can have your head turned and maybe devote disproportionate time or resource against something that perhaps isn't quite as proven. I think that my personal perspective on it is, that the bulk of budget, we would want to invest in proven channels, but obviously you would also want to retain some budget for test and learn, or more emerging channels, let's say, and to figure out what the next big thing is going to be.
For sure. I'd like to just ask you about if you saw any surprises when you were first started modeling, these things. Were there any new insights you got into customers? Were there, events that you didn't know were having an effect on? I mean, it's easy to walk into these things saying like, I know my business, I'm not really expecting too much, but in terms of really knowing or learning a lot. But what did you learn from it all that really kind of caught you off guard?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not sure if there's anything that was a massive surprise, but definitely, there have been some extremely sort of interesting stuff that we've uncovered along the way. I don't really want to play up to the British stereotype of talking about the weather, but Co-op is very much a weather-driven business, particularly on the food side. So I've got a few examples actually that come to mind. The first one being back in 2018. We had a really long, hot summer. The weather was unbelievable for a period of weeks, and that just happened to coincide with the Football World Cup. So we know that hot weather drives sales. We know that the World Cup drives sales, but that World Cup also happened to be a World Cup where England actually did really well. We got to the semi-finals. And just to complicate things even further, we also had a really relevant TV ad that year. So I mean, I'm not sure if any of your audience are football fans, but there's a thing called a penalty shootout, which happens at the end of a football match in the event of a tie. And England had a terrible record at penalty shootouts. I think we'd won. We never won one before in a World Cup, and maybe we won one in the European Championships. Anyway, we had this ad that played up to this thing about the penalty shootout, and lo and behold, England drew Colombia in the first knockout round and went and won our first ever penalty shootout in the World Cup finals. So it couldn't have been more relevant, really. So we had all of this stuff going on, and as you might expect, we had fantastic sales, but what we needed to do was to untangle the effects of all of those different things. And it was great because using the models, and because we had the modeling at such a granular level, we were really able to get into the detail of that and figure out that actually the weather drove the majority of the sales. The World Cup had a big impact, but a secondary impact to the weather. And England's good run on it was kind of the cherry on the cake. So that was fascinating. I think going back to your point, was it surprising? I think we always kind of knew that the weather was a bigger deal than the football, but we were never really able to quantify it. So the modeling really helped us to be able to do that. Another weather-based example is sort of how hot is hot. That was something that came out of the category modeling project that I mentioned earlier on. And what we find is that there are different trigger temperatures at which you really start to see category sales take off. But the interesting thing is, depending on where you are in the country, those trigger temperatures differ. So, if you're up in the north of Scotland versus being down on the south coast, the temperature doesn't need to be anywhere near as high in Scotland to drive those sales increases as it does on the south coast. And, all of these kind of things, although a lot of it is common sense to some extent, what we've been able to do through the modeling is we've been able to quantify that, and we've been able to build in rules that enable us to sort of capitalize on that knowledge.
I think that's so cool. That's so cool. So how does actually, we are running low on time, so let's get into I think we have one Q&A I wanted to get to for sure, maybe two if we have a chance. What are the first signs that you see results from MMM? What is what is the data that comes back? It's working.
I guess the first thing to say would be just seeing the recommendations being acted on. I mean, ultimately, sort of the proof in it is, you know, are we seeing the ROIs go up? And, you know, we are. It's great. You know, we've seen the ROIs increase year over year, but you've got to be really careful if all you're looking at is the ROI, because there's so many different factors that can have an impact. So, you know, the amount of, like, the absolute amount of marketing spend will have a big impact on the overall ROI. You know, also things like media costs, you know, that if you get cheaper media, you're going to see an ROI increase. So, you know, whilst that's great and that's what we're aiming for, you also got to keep an eye on the absolute profitability. So yeah, definitely seeing recommendations come to fruition. And also, I suppose the other thing that I would mention is when you start to see our mix being much more optimal. So, you know, if I went back 6 years, our mix would be, you know, nowhere near as optimal as it is now. And there's, you know, we're at a point now, particularly with food, where our mix is about as optimal as we can get, and there's very limited headroom for us to drive further growth through media mix optimizations, just because we're in such a good place with it. And you know, going back to that point about recommendations being acted on, our media agency is really good at that. So we had one a little while ago, which was to do with digital radio, which wasn't performing as well for us as some of our sort of standard radio channels. And there's a really great graph which shows digital radio as a proportion of total radio. And basically what you see is about 2 or 3 weeks after the debrief, you just see that ratio drop off a cliff. And, you know, that's exactly what we want to be seeing. And, you know, that to me is proof that it's working, because, you know, not only are the decisions being made, when we then come to the next round, you start to see the ROIs improve, you know, from a radio perspective, and you know that you're onto a winner.
Yeah. Great. Hey, we got Ruin back, and we decided we don't need you, Ruin, so you can just, you know, I'm kicking you out.
Fair enough. Yeah, apologies, guys. The entire mobile network just went off for literally 5 minutes for some reason.
No problem. We limped along without you. And do you see that question that came up in the? Oh, you probably can't see. You can. Are you on a phone right now?
Me? No. I'm with you guys on the app.
Do you see the question that came in from that SS in the Q&A panel?
I can't actually. I don't know why that's not coming through.
Let me read it. It's pretty cool. It's long though, so bear with me. If you come up with a recommendation or insight, which is the result of modeling, like conversion KPI is twice as effective for channel 2 than for channel 1 on Sundays, just as an example, right? Do you have the tools or see a need for tools which can take this recommendation or insight and slice and dice it by city, region, month, week, current year, basically some kind of tool that will take the validating modeling insight as given and do business intelligent actions or data exploration to understand the insight better? Did you follow all that?
Yeah, gosh. I mean, I suppose the point is when we and apologies if this doesn't quite answer the question, but I think what we're getting at there is whatever the insight is and however it's come out, we absolutely need the support of the guys who are doing the sort of buying and the media planning to make sure that the stuff we're coming up with is actually actionable. Because there's very little point in saying things like, oh, let's say, channel X is more efficient on Sundays. But because the way you actually buy channel X, you can't actually upweight that time of the week. Because media gets bought at a bundle level, they guarantee a minimum delivery of 15% off channel X on Sundays, and therefore that's a great insight to have, and we'll look out for opportunities going forward, but it's not necessarily something that we can go around and tell everyone in the business, hey, your media agency is terrible, why aren't they buying twice as much of channel X on Sundays? We know it works really well. So it's you need to be careful that you don't sort of end up chasing your own tail in terms of, hang on, what's the most granular, most super finding we can find. Right. You need to have these things at a level where it's generalized enough to actually act on, and not so specific that if we find that website X on a Wednesday afternoon at 3 o'clock drives twice as many always twice as effective, but okay, that represents maybe 20 people. That's not something we can generally use and exploit and leverage at a macro scale.
You don't want to fall in love with just one fact, and then build everything else around that. It seems like, there's many factors. And I think that's like what you guys are showing us here today, is just how many different elements. And, as you said, Ruin, the more data, the better, Listen, guys, I want to wrap it up because we are running a little bit over time. I want to thank you for just all your insights and your time today. I want to thank our attendees as well for all their great questions. If there's anything that's unanswered, we will get back to you. I will work with Steve and Ruin to answer those questions. Happy holidays to both Steve and Ruin. I appreciate you guys very much. I'll be talking to you in the new year. We had a couple of things I wanted to just let our audience know about. If you follow BrightBlue on LinkedIn, they have this great episodic content of Diary of the Econometrician. And I really encourage you to check that out. It's really good. And they also have a newsletter that it takes a look at all kinds of different little statistical stories of interest. This can be anything from a sporting event or the 2020 presidential election. Don't bother scribbling these down. We're going to chat these to you right now. So you can just click on them and sign up if you like. Lastly, if you want to be in the know about upcoming episodes of Live with Mighty Hive, you can subscribe at livewithmightyhive.splashthat.com. And if you have any ideas for a show or any questions you want to send our way, anything at all, really just reach out to us over email at live@mightyhive.com. This is our last episode of the year. I think we're all looking forward to a better year in 2021. So I'll just say Happy New Year to everybody, and we will see you all then. Thanks so much.